Welcome to the Baker Files, where two generations take on true crime from two different perspectives. I'm Adrianne, and I'm here with my son and co-host Tyler.
What's up, everyone?
Each episode, we open a new file and dig into crimes, the choices, and the questions that keep us wondering why. We don't claim to have all the answers. We're just a mom and son looking at the same case through two different lenses. And today's case is different. Because normally we sit down and talk about a killer, we know who their victims were in the last couple cases that we did. With Israel Keyes, we don't. We know the names of Samantha Koenig, Bill Currier, and Lorraine Currier, but the FBI believes Israel Keyes murdered 11 people. If they're right, that means there are potentially 8 other people whose families may still not know what happened to them. And Keyes deliberately tried to make sure they never would. So Tyler does know about this case. He is aware. So it's going to be a little different for us. But what makes Israel Keyes particularly frightening is the way he operated. He didn't necessarily kill people who looked a certain way. He didn't always kill near his home. He traveled. He rented cars. He drove hundreds or sometimes thousands of miles. He hid supplies around the country before he needed them. And sometimes, according to investigators, he selected his victims essentially at random. This is the case of Israel Keyes. So who was Israel Keyes? Israel Keyes was born January 7th, 1978 in Utah. He grew up as one of 10 children in an extremely isolated household. The family eventually lived in rural Washington, where the kids were homeschooled and lived largely separated from mainstream society. Their home was extremely primitive without any modern conveniences, and religion played a significant role in the family life. At one point, the family associated with a Christian identity congregation and ideology associated with racism and white supremacy beliefs. As Keyes grew older, however, he moved away from his family's religious beliefs. Then, in 1998, he entered the United States Army. He served until 2001. People who knew him during his military service generally remembered someone who could function normally. He wasn't walking around announcing to everybody that he wanted to become a serial killer, which, most people don't do that. They're not going to advertise. And that's something important to remember throughout this case, though. Israel Keyes had relationships. He even became a father. He worked. He eventually owned a construction business in Alaska. Customers hired him. Neighbors knew him. People interacted with him without realizing what investigators would eventually discover. In one FBI interview, Keyes described himself essentially as having 2 different sides, and those 2 lives existed simultaneously for years. Could you ever really know someone who was deliberately separating their life this way? I mean, someone who's so measured, do you think you could pick up on it? I don't know.
No, because everybody's so focused on their own stuff that it's, unless you really, truly were to take a deeper look into people's lives, I mean, it's just, no, like they say, it's, everyone's so worried about themselves all the time. Yeah, no, it makes sense why nobody knew.
Why you can get away with that.
Yeah.
That's something I keep coming back to. People always ask how nobody noticed, but what exactly were they supposed to notice? And
Right.
Like you said, people are kind of self-absorbed and they kind of notice their own stuff,
Yeah.
If someone is deliberately creating a normal life while hiding everything else, the people around them aren't investigators too, So, investigators believe Keyes' criminal activities escalated long before Samantha Koenig. Keyes later described an attack on a young woman in Oregon during the late 1990s. He abducted and sexually assaulted her, but ultimately allowed her to live. What's disturbing about the way he later discussed this incident is that he didn't seem to look back on letting her survive with relief. Instead, he apparently viewed it as a failure of nerve. By the time Keyes left the Army in 2001, investigators believe his period of murder may have begun. The FBI ultimately concluded that Keyes likely committed multiple kidnappings and murders across the United States between approximately 2001 and his arrest in 2012. But there was a huge problem. Keyes didn't operate like the serial killers most of us immediately think about. So his method, this is probably the part of the Israel Keyes case that has made him so infamous. He planned, sometimes years ahead. Keyes traveled extensively and buried containers of supplies in remote locations. Investigators called them caches. True crime coverage often called them kill kits. Inside could be weapons, ammunition, tools, money, and other supplies. Then he could return months or even years later. Think about what that accomplished.
Yeah, no, he was precise, deliberate.
Yeah. He could fly from Alaska, where he lived, to another state, and he didn't have to bring a weapon through the airport. So he didn't have to worry about, that. It was already there. He didn't have to buy everything immediately before a murder. So he didn't walk into a hardware store and buy duct tape or
or leave any kind of traces or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, is wasn't a lot of his victims just like mostly random, like you said?
All of them.
So there was, in terms of the not being considered as a quote unquote normal serial
he didn't
killer,
have a type.
There was no motive. There was, at least, from the outside looking in, it was just so almost spontaneous, which can lead to many difficulties of...
Yeah. And in different states, right?
Yeah. Yeah, all across the way.
So he's killing someone in New York, and then he goes to Texas and he kills someone else, and then goes, who knows? They only really know about the three. That's what he told them.
Right. Which is so unfortunate of not being able to know all the other victims.
Yeah. So he could fly somewhere, rent a car, drive hundreds of miles away from his arrival airport, that too, you know what I mean? So he could fly into, you think the East Coast, right? New York, all those tiny states over there. He could go 3 states away from where he arrived and drive 150 miles and be in a totally different state.
Oh, yeah. Easy.
Yeah. And if he'd hidden, the kill kit there, he could just retrieve his supplies, commit a crime nowhere near where his travel records placed him. Then he could leave. Investigators recovered caches associated with him, including one near Blake Falls Reservoir, New York. Keyes also admitted committing bank robberies, and investigators said some of the cash stored in his caches came from those robberies. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was planned, designed to break the normal connections police use when solving crimes. Victim, location, suspect, vehicle, credit card, weapon. Keyes tried to separate all of them. So basically, if police looked at someone who disappeared in Vermont, there would be no obvious reason to look at a construction worker who lived in Alaska.
Right. And that's the key word that you said, was the impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike so many of the others, the Bundys, the Dahmers, etc.
Right.
It was always where they lived. It was always more opportunity-based, and they more or less scrambled to, especially back then with the lack of certain...
Yeah. Or it'd be victims of the same demographic, right?
No,
young
exactly,
women in their 20s.
There was a pattern. There was no pattern to his...
There's no pattern at all. No rhyme or reason at all. And that became incredibly important in 2011. Bill and Lorraine Currier lived in Essex, Vermont. They were a married couple living an ordinary life. They didn't know Israel Keyes. There was no feud, no relationship, no obvious connection between them. And according to investigators, Keyes chose them at random. In June of 2011, Keyes flew from Anchorage to Chicago. Then he rented a vehicle. Instead of simply staying around Chicago, he drove roughly 1,000 miles towards Vermont. He had previously hidden a cache in the region. On June 8, 2011, Keyes targeted Bill and Lorraine. He broke into their home and restrained them. He then forced the couple into their own vehicle and drove them to an abandoned farmhouse that he had already located, so he'd already scoped it out. What happened inside that house was horrific. Both fought for their lives. Bill began breaking free of his restraints. Keyes struggled with him and shot him before sexually assaulting and strangling Lorraine. Keyes left their bodies at the abandoned property. And then something happened that made solving their murders even more difficult. The farmhouse was eventually demolished. Its contents were taken to a landfill. When Keyes finally confessed to killing the Curriers, investigators searched the landfill for weeks, but their bodies were never recovered. Keyes knew details about the crime that investigators believed established his involvement and evidence connecting him to the area and his cache. Imagine being the Currier family. Bill and Lorraine just disappeared. For approximately a year, there is no explanation. Then authorities tell you that a serial killer living thousands of miles away has confessed. And there is absolutely no reason your loved ones were chosen other than the fact that this man happened to select their house. Just completely random. That's terrifying in a completely different way than a crime committed because of a relationship or a conflict like we've talked about in our last
Very
podcast,
true.
Right? There wasn't anything Bill and Lorraine could have done differently. There was nothing that they could have done to prevent this. They simply encountered someone who had decided he wanted to kill.
So he literally just chose a house at random. Did he see these people even beforehand?
We don't know. He never
had to have
said,
scoped it out and seen what they're,
yeah.
this, that, been able
He did know the farmhouse was there, right? So he scoped out the area. He had a cache there, but who knows if he
had to have profiled
beforehand?
them in some capacity because you're not going to just, the dude was too decisive, too exact to just randomly break into some random. So yes, no, it was random in terms of there was no connection. There was no reason other than that was just who he chose. But yeah, there had to have been.
Even if he did scope them out, and it was still completely random.
It's totally random.
Yeah, totally random. For years, Keyes had protected himself by creating distance between himself and his crimes. Then he broke his own pattern. He killed close to home. And that victim was 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. On February 1st, 2012, Samantha was working at the Common Grounds coffee stand on Tudor Road in Anchorage, Alaska. Keyes approached the stand late that night. He abducted Samantha at gunpoint, forced her from the coffee stand to his pickup truck parked nearby. He obtained her debit card information and PIN number. Keyes then took Samantha away. According to federal indictment later filed against him, he raped her and then strangled her with a cable tie. He left her body in a shed in his backyard. And then he left Alaska. He actually went on a cruise, flew to New Orleans, and went on a cruise. Samantha's family, meanwhile, was desperately looking for her. When Keyes returned, he devised a ransom scheme intended to convince her family she was still alive. He staged a photograph of Samantha and demanded ransom money be deposited into an account connected to her debit card. There is an extremely disturbing detail often discussed regarding how Keyes prepared Samantha for that photograph. We don't need to describe it in graphic detail here, but the important point is this. Samantha was already dead when the ransom photograph was taken.
And a week at that point, if not however long the cruise was.
So he probably took the picture before he left, I would think.
Had to have, right?
Yeah. Because by the time he got back, she would probably have been pretty decomposed or starting to do that. So one important connection, if you've seen pictures online claiming to be Samantha's actual ransom photo, the widely circulated image is not something we should present as authentic FBI ransom photographs. There has been some recreation circulating online for years. But Keyes wasn't trying to return Samantha, obviously. He was just trying to exploit her family's hope that she might still be alive. So just a sick, twisted, whatever in his head, and maybe to get more money too. Eventually, Keyes dismembered her body and disposed of it in Matanuska Lake, north of Anchorage. Her remains were later recovered by the FBI. But his ransom plan created something Keyes had spent years trying to avoid. It created a trail. Samantha's family deposited money into the account, and Keyes began withdrawing it. At first, withdrawals occurred in Alaska. Then the cards started moving. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Every ATM transaction created another piece of evidence. Investigators were able to follow the withdrawals. I mean, that's pretty basic, right?
That's the thing, though, is I'm sitting here thinking about it. Why the sudden drastic change? Why all of a sudden kill closer to home? Do this whole ransom scheme for money? Like,
totally out of character.
Completely. What, was he bored? Was he...
I don't know.
I mean, if he had gone continuing doing what he was doing and being very meticulous with his, the things that he was carrying out, like, we may have not know who he is today.
Right.
And it just may continue, you know what I mean?
Yeah. He could have gotten away with it. So did he want to get caught,
Possibly, but it's just like, went from so white to then flipping black. I don't know. It just is, it's very odd. And that's where I'm curious on is the why. What changed? Was there something personal going on? Was he ready to just be done? But it's like that doesn't make any sense either.
Surveillance associated with the transactions, of course, helped the authorities identify the vehicle Keyes was driving because ATMs have cameras, right?
Yeah.
So even if he was kind of disguising himself, maybe seeing what he was driving. But this is a bizarre contradiction for Israel Keyes. For years, he had apparently gone to extraordinary length to hide his movement and separate himself from his crimes. Then he repeatedly used the debit card of a nationally publicized missing woman while driving across the country.
And that's honestly what it is I don't think that it was a lack of judgment or he was being dumb. I think what it comes down to is that he had gotten away with it so many times over and over and over again. Maybe it got stale and he was obviously...
He was like, catch me
looking back at it, he bit off more than he could chew. But yeah, it was more maybe a pride thing. It came down to see what I can get away with.
Right. Yeah, and changing it up.
Took on obviously more than he... Yeah, but still, it still teeters that line of just using her banking information. Like, come on, man. Like, that is...
It's basic. Like, commonsensical of you're going to get caught. So on March 13th of 2012, authorities arrest Israel Keyes in Lufkin, Texas. And at first, police didn't realize exactly who they had caught. They had a suspect in Samantha Koenig's disappearance. They did not yet know they had a man the FBI would eventually describe as a serial killer responsible for potentially 11 murders. After his arrest, investigators began interviewing Keyes. Over time, those interviews totaled more than 40 hours, and listening to portions of them is strange. Keyes doesn't sound like a movie villain. Sometimes he laughs. Sometimes he's conversational. Sometimes he negotiates. And sometimes he just avoids answering the questions at all. And that normality makes the interviews more unsettling. He wanted control. Keyes knew investigators wanted information about other victims, and he understood that information had value. One major concern for Keyes was publicity. He did not want his young daughter growing up surrounded by the details of his crimes. He also wanted his case resolved relatively quickly. Investigators wanted something completely different. Of course, they wanted names, locations, bodies, families they could finally give answers to. So a bizarre negotiation developed. Keyes would reveal information, then stop. Give investigators a clue, and then become evasive. Eventually, he told them about Bill and Lorraine Currier. Suddenly, investigators realized Samantha wasn't an isolated murder. This is where the case becomes frustrating. Keyes never gave investigators a clean list. The FBI ultimately said it believed he murdered 11 people. But why 11? Investigators tried repeatedly to get Keyes to give them a number. He told them the number was fewer than 12. During interviews, investigators referred to his 11 victims several times. Keyes was known to correct investigators when they got details wrong, but he didn't correct that number. Combined with other statements he made, the FBI concluded that 11 was likely the total, and only 3 have been identified.
Wow.
So, I mean, we don't even know. Was that just another game of his? You know, who knows?
Yeah, no, that is frustrating, especially going back to just the lack of details we have with his life in general.
Mm-hmm.
We have a little bit of how he was brought up, but without like really truly understanding the way that, you know, he was raised, or his childhood or adolescence and young adulthood and all those. It's hard to get the behavioral and environmental analysis of his psychology and understanding what led him to do these crimes.
Right.
Because there's so many times from others we can understand, like, okay, yes, their mom was abusive and this led to that. And so this is why they target women, and this is why they do this specific thing. And there's just none of that. It's hard to find a why other than he's just a cold-blooded killer with no emotion and is very meticulous with what he does. Up until the end, of course, when he either was just completely lacking judgment of what he was doing, or was trying to test himself, or just was done. I don't think it's the former. It's probably one of the latter, but yeah.
Yeah. So that potentially leaves 8 people, but who knows, right? Keyes would discuss other murders without providing enough information to conclusively identify all the victims. He'd give them little snippets. He'd indicate that he'd killed people in Washington state. Investigators believe he may have killed and buried someone in upstate New York in April of 2009. He spoke about a couple in Washington and another victim in that region. He also hinted at crimes elsewhere. And because he traveled so extensively, investigators had an enormous task. They started reconstructing his flights, rental cars, mileage, credit card activity, border crossings, his hotel stays, campgrounds, family trips. Anywhere Israel Keyes could be placed became potentially relevant. But there's another problem. A plane ticket tells investigators where Keyes landed. It doesn't tell them where he went afterwards. The courier's murder proved that. He flew into Chicago and then drove approximately 1,000 miles away to kill them. There is one potential victim worth discussing separately. Deborah Feldman disappeared from Hackensack, New Jersey in April of 2009. The FBI publicly sought information regarding possible contact between Feldman and Keyes. Keyes had admitted killing someone around that period, and investigators found aspects of Feldman's disappearance potentially significant. But this distinctive is extremely important. Deborah Feldman has not been conclusively established as an Israel Keyes victim. Keyes died without giving investigators the answers necessary to provide that connection. And this is where true crime needs to be careful. There are numerous missing person cases people online have attempted to connect to Keyes. Some theories are interesting, some timelines appear possible, but Keyes could have been there is not the same thing as Keyes killed this person. There are real missing people with real families. So we're not going to turn every unexplained disappearance between Alaska and Maine into an Israel Keyes victim just because a theory exists online.
There will never be anything brought to light.
Nope.
That is highly unfortunate.
Yeah. So why was he so difficult to catch? Keyes understood something extremely simple. Police departments are local. He wasn't. Imagine someone disappearing in Washington, another person disappearing years later in New York. A couple could disappear in Vermont. A young woman disappears in Alaska. Different victims, different years, different police departments, different circumstances, potentially different methods. What tells investigators those cases belong together? Almost nothing. Today, databases, DNA, and interagency communication make connecting crimes easier than they once were, but Keyes deliberately created noise. He traveled without necessarily committing a crime. Sometimes he committed crimes far away from where he landed. He used cash, he rented vehicles, he buried supplies ahead of time. He chose victims who weren't connected to him. And according to the FBI, he studied other serial killers. The horrifying part isn't that Israel Keyes invented some flawless method of murder. He didn't. He was eventually caught because he made mistakes. The horrifying part is that he understood how difficult it could be to connect crimes that appear completely unrelated.
That's the thing, too, is it's like it was like finding a loophole in more of the modern era. Of course, his crimes were committed almost 20 years ago at this point, but still. We're not talking about the 70s here,
right?
You know, when
there was
serial killer era, like there was a bunch, going around, but definitely of course, with modern technology and most definitely the internet, making it everyone has a camera on them at all times, and there's so many different things going on, But it's
yeah, but if he's changing his MO every time, he's killing a couple, then he's killing a single person. Maybe he strangles one, maybe he shoots one. Because like Bill and Lorraine, he shot Bill and he strangled, after sexually assaulting Lorraine. So that sounds like, for at least the women,
right,
it was a sexual thing. But if you're changing your MO, even looking at interagency things, you're looking for the same MO.
Right.
So things aren't going to pop out if he changes it up.
Right. And that's the thing, too, is it's ultimately like the perfect storm. If given the chance, a lot of psychopaths, killers, serial killers, given the choice, would do probably the same thing. But do they have the facilities to do so? Do they have the capacity to have a double life, create the funds needed to travel as much as he did, have the situations happen that, allowed you to be able to do this? Most of the time, that's not the case. That's why they end up killing someone in their own town, or based off opportunity, or based off of just circumstance. It was, like I said, the perfect storm of this person willing to put in the time to do it, ridiculously and psychotically so. But
that was probably part of his. I don't want to say joy, but the planning of it.
Right.
He probably got off on that, going around and planning these, and it would make him, think about, someday.
And the fact that, again, bringing up what you said in the beginning is the impulsiveness is like, you see so many times with people who want to commit murder, it's like this overbearing, ridiculous impulse to do so.
Yeah.
And it's something that cannot be fought. It's like almost an addiction. Like you have to get your rush. And that's what leads to improper planning and leaving behind evidence and doing this because you're impulsively doing this. To whereas he was able to wait for years and years on end.
Yeah.
Without doing so.
And be patient.
Without, committing these horrific fantasies. That's what made it so difficult.
Yeah. So was he brilliant, or was he an organized predator who eventually became overconfident?
I think you hit it on the head right there.
Yeah.
I don't think it takes a genius to understand that what he did was not that it wasn't, I don't want to use words like special or interesting or anything like that, but it's different the way that he orchestrated his actions. But
yeah, I think sometimes true crime accidentally gives killers more credit than they deserve, too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it takes a genius to understand that that's something that could work, of just understanding the patterns of, like you said, he studied serial killers.
Right.
So you study the patterns and the things and of which led them to their end, to their demise, to their arrests. You can formulate somewhat of an idea of just avoid the mistakes of those in the past.
Yeah.
And like I said, him having the ability to travel as much as he was and do the things that he was able to do, it made it so much more lucrative. Whereas others either didn't have that possibility or they just have more of that impulse and was willing to take way more risk.
Right.
He dissolved all the risk for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness he was caught, because it's otherwise, it would have been.
He could have gone on.
Could have just gone on. And imagine him leaving the country.
Mm-hmm.
You could do whatever he wanted.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe on that cruise, who knows? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So after his arrest, investigators were racing against something they didn't fully appreciate at first. Keyes was the only person who knew the identity of all his victims. And on December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keyes was found dead in his Anchorage jail cell. Near him, investigators found writings. The FBI later analyzed those writings and said they did not contain a hidden code or useful clues identifying additional victims. Years later, another disturbing piece of evidence became public. Keyes had drawn a series of skulls in his own blood. There were 11. One included the words, "We are one." Investigators believe the number of skulls may correspond to the number of people he murdered. But once Keyes died, whatever leverage investigators had was gone. No more negotiations, no more interviews, no more names. And potentially 8 families lost one of the only people capable of telling them what happened. So the FBI continued investigating after Keyes' death, of course. They released portions of his interviews and detailed information about his travels because investigators hoped someone might recognize something. A campground, a vehicle, a date, a town, a missing person, a strange interaction, something that might connect Israel Keyes to another victim. And that's why this case isn't really finished. Samantha Koenig has a name. Bill Currier has a name, and Lorraine Currier has a name. But if the FBI estimate is correct, 8 other people may belong in that list. Someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's husband, someone's wife. Someone whose disappearance may not even be classified as a murder. They could just be a missing person. One of the most haunting things Keyes told investigators was that at least one victim's death may have been considered accidental. This case leaves me with several questions. First, do we believe 11 was really the number?
I
don't know.
Don't know. I wouldn't. Yeah. That's the thing, is like focusing on the number is almost trivial. It could be less. Like we said, he very well, if we go down the idea of it was a prideful thing that got him caught, he very well could have been inflated numbers, or it could be way, way more.
Right.
Unfortunately, we'll never know.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting tidbit of like what you said with him doing the 11 skulls, which makes sense. It might be 11 because what else are you going to conclude with the 11 skulls he writes in his blood? But that's very almost ritualistic of saying we're all one. Maybe he did have or wanted to have an MO, or there was something that drove him to commit these murders, and he just had maybe he did have the intellect to have the understanding to the only way to carry out what he wanted to do was to not leave an MO, to not leave any type of motive as to why he was doing what he was doing. So, but then once it was all over, his last little thing was, so that's interesting. I didn't know that he did that.
I think that
he did that in his cell or something.
Yeah. Before he died, before he killed himself. I think that he probably kind of did have an MO, but with him having spread out his victims so far, they didn't know who they were.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes
Yeah.
down to, is it's
Yeah.
in the vein of mystery of like him not coming or revealing, because it's like a lot of them do. Because another interesting thing is he actually cared about what his daughter was going to see.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't want to have his name dragged through the mud, and which he rightfully deserves, but
Right.
no publicity or the desire of there to be, which so many of them do. They want their name
Right. He didn't
plastered
want the
everywhere.
notoriety.
They want to be these notorious
Mhm.
celebrities or whatever, and have their name etched in history and this and that, and that wasn't there, but maybe it was all just a lie. But it was just the fact that he didn't say anything at all. It's just so disheartening. It's so unfortunate.
I mean, it clearly he was someone who enjoyed controlling the information.
Oh yeah,
that was given, right?
There's definitely had to have been just yeah.
Do you think
a
Israel
psychopath,
Keys really
100%.
wanted his other victims identified? I mean, he didn't tell them. So why was he gatekeeping?
Or
those
was
other
that
people?
another semblance of, that's what I'm going down, is like, oh, it depends on what path you go down of thinking. Of like, if it was a prideful thing, yeah, of course, he's going to inflate the numbers because he won't tell you because he can't tell you because they don't exist.
Right. That's true too. That's true
like they
too.
genuinely, but it was more of a, yeah, he's thinking I'm that guy. I got away with so many of these, da da da. Or maybe it was just the three, and Samantha was the one that obviously it got to his, where he got caught and everything. But yeah, no.
Yeah. Right. Was he the criminal mastermind he'd often portrayed as? Maybe that was his notoriety.
Maybe that was just a guise, and
Yeah.
he completely.
So maybe because he admitted to the two, and then he was caught because of the third, because he abandoned all his precautions.
Yeah.
After Samantha. So Israel Keys died at 34 years old. He never stood trial for Samantha Koenig's murder. Bill and Lorraine Currier's bodies were never recovered, and the FBI never received a complete confession investigators desperately wanted. Maybe someday DNA, missing persons database, or another piece of evidence will identify another victim, but it's also possible that some of those names died with him. And maybe that's the part of this case that bothers me the most. Israel Keys spent years making people disappear. Then, when investigators finally had him in a room and had a chance to find those people, he took the answers with him. So when we talk about Israel Keys, I don't think the lasting memory should be how clever was he. It should be who are still missing, because we always want to think about the victims.
Of course.
Always.
Condolences to everyone involved.
Yeah, because Israel Keys doesn't deserve the mythology. His unidentified victims deserve their names back.
No,
100%.
Never.
Yeah. And you're right. Maybe there aren't 8.
Yeah.
It's
a possibility.
I mean, maybe he did just want that notoriety, even though he was like, oh, I don't want my daughter to know. Who knows? And that's the why. We're never going to know the why in this case. The randomness of it, the caches, the kill kits. I think that's scary. That's when I first heard about Israel Keys, that's what stood out to me, was like the planning of it all. So who knows?
Right, because it goes against everything that you would know normally. Of just, yeah. Luck of the draw. How terrifying is that?
Right? Like you could just be walking
right
down
under
the street
your nose.
And, I mean, it doesn't matter what you look like, what you wear, what you do. It just, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the mood strikes, and so they grab you. That's what scares me. That's what keeps me up at night.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's like there's jokes, Dahmer says that tattoos taste horrible, so go get tattoos,
Right.
So I would be safe from a cannibal since I'm covered. But you never know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, all joking aside, is just, yeah. And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Baker Files. The case may be closed for today, but the questions, the choices, and the why behind it all are what keep these stories with us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Baker Files and leave us a rating or review. It helps more listeners find the show. You can find us on Instagram at the Baker File Podcast and TikTok at the.baker.files, where we'll be sharing episode updates, case discussions, and more. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. I'm Adrianne.
And I'm Tyler. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon.
Until next time, we're closing the file.